What exactly is going on in China? And what does this have to do with tech products coming down in price? Well, today's video is going to be a little bit different to what we're used to uploading here at Tech Yes City, in that today we're going to be taking a look at China and what's causing a massive slowdown in their domestic consumption, and ultimately what this means for you as a consumer expecting to buy, say, a gaming PC or even a, lo and behold, much anticipated, reasonably priced graphics card in the next few months. Well, this story actually starts off over a year ago, where China's real estate market was having massive slowdowns in growth, where prices of properties just became way overpriced for what people could afford. And in fact, it became so bad to the point where people were going out getting these massive loans and buying properties that the developers hadn't even intended on finishing from much later date. And this actually got to the stage where it was so bad that the Chinese government knew they had a massive problem on their hands, and so they had to put in a strict coding system from stopping these companies from borrowing not just beyond their means, but selling these overpriced homes, which ultimately in turn, they knew the person buying the home couldn't afford the mortgage they were taking out. And so what happened when these new regulations were introduced is that the companies that were massively over leveraged in that they've borrowed way too much money versus the assets and equity that they actually own was too far in favor of debt. They then failed to raise new money to not only just pay off the existing loans, but also build these previous homes that they had promised the people that have already paid them in full, who those people most likely mortgaged money on as well. And so this whole system was essentially a bubble that was waiting to pop. And so now that this bubble is in the process of popping, this means not only real estate prices are coming down, but also the banks that initially loaned out a lot of this money, they're feeling the struggle as well, meaning they don't have the money to pay the people who have their money in their banks as deposits. And so this is essentially leading into a massive problem in China, where there's now banks that are starting to collapse and people are losing their money. And so when the average person starts losing their money, aka their discretionary income, they can no longer afford to go out and buy tech products like your gaming graphics cards. So now we've identified the fundamental problem, let's take a look a little bit underneath the surface.
Never pay full price for Windows 10 or 11 again. With today's video sponsor SCD Keys, you can get activated for as little as $15 using that coupon BFTYC. Links in the description below.
The year is 2022 and the Chinese economy is the second largest in the world by GDP based in US dollar terms. In fact, some would argue that it's even the biggest in the world if you were to adjust America's CPI numbers and then measure that against Chinese gross domestic product. But regardless, the Chinese economy has grown massively in the last 2 decades. It's overtaken countries like Japan threefold, and with that, this gross domestic product growth leads to ultimately massive consumption of products by the people in the country itself. So after the 2008 global financial crisis, it could be said that China was the country that brought the world out of this crisis itself. With their massive growth of GDP per capita, this meant that the average Chinese consumer was getting richer, and of course, when you're getting richer, what do you always want? You're probably thinking, Brian, you want a car? No, you don't want a car, you want a gaming PC. Well, actually, you probably want both. But this is what saw companies like Colorful, which is a Chinese-based graphics card manufacturer, to soar from the ranks to becoming the world #1 graphics card shipment company. Now, if you're in America or Australia, you may have even never have heard of the brand Colorful before, but they actually make very good graphics cards, and they are the #1 producer by shipment volumes in 2022, followed by Palette. However, all this might seem rosy on the surface, though this is a country that has been growing with phenomenal real GDP numbers for over 2 decades. And now in 2022, they're faced with quite a big slowdown in that growth. In fact, the second in charge in China has warned of a slowdown in Chinese gross domestic product in 2022, with numbers dropping to around 3%. And then also forecasts showing that it's going to continually fall to even as low as 2%, which historically is extremely low for China, and also means that perhaps the Chinese growth story may be coming to an end. And with that slowdown in gross domestic product, we're also going to see a slowdown in domestic consumption. Now, since PC gaming is such a unique industry in that it's grown massively over the last 2 decades, I believe it's grown hand in hand with the Chinese domestic consumption. And so now that the PC gaming industry, I believe, has peaked, especially now that things are opening up after COVID, we're also seeing a peak in Chinese domestic consumption, or GDP per capita. That is, how wealthy is the average person in China. That seems to be slowing down with these rates of growth. I've personally seen a slowdown in PC sales locally, and then all the people that I speak to have also seen quite a slowdown too. Now, this has been reflected later in this year with very poor earnings reports from especially Nvidia and Intel. AMD, on the other hand, did manage to come out a lot better than the other two, but the whole industry in general for PC gaming is down officially by the numbers. So looking through this data more, we can see that not only the real estate has fallen off tremendously, but also things like automobile growth, which has been very strong, especially in the electric car industry, that is also starting to show signs of slowing down a lot too. An official retail sales report for July said auto sales growth slowed to 9.7% year-on-year pace, down from 13.9% in June. Automobile sales accounted for 10% of China's retail sales in July, which grew by a disappointing 2.7% last month from a year ago. We were seeing here with the economic data that property sales and construction and private sector growth were all slowing, and growth in infrastructure and manufacturing sector investment also slowed. Youth unemployment hit a record 19.9%, and then we move on to economic data released at the start of this week shows despite some efforts by the central authorities to stimulate an economy that has been nearly flatlining, China's economy is still slowing. So basically, China is starting to try and stimulate their economy again, but it's falling on deaf ears, and that the people aren't really buying much of this whole, hey, keep going out and borrowing money and that'll stimulate your economy. And this in itself has been the exact problem that people have been arguing that has been going on in the United States. And that is, with all this new printed money from governments and stimulation, you're keeping companies alive that aren't effective and aren't efficient. And then this then leads on to an economy that lacks innovation and has high inefficiency, which is one that you do not want going forward if you want to improve the average living standards of the people living in that country. Though back to China, they are in a really sticky situation where inflation is slightly on the rise and interest rates were on the rise to combat that. However, they've now reversed the interest rates down 10 basis points to try and sort of balance this effect out. Now, whether inflation continues to go up remains to be seen, but if inflation does keep going up and consumption goes down, which can ultimately lead to the devastating effect known as stagflation. And if you don't think this is a devastating effect, just go ask the people who are now paying over 50% more for their rent every week just to live in a home. But now with all that information out of the way, it's time to get back to tech and the prices therein. And what we've seen in 2022 is actually a much more comfortable situation for those who want to go out and buy a gaming PC. Parts are now readily available and parts are easily accessible at much better prices. But this does lead me to worry about what's going to happen in 2023. Where we saw these massive orders in 2021 and all these news articles coming out and saying, well, this supply problem, especially for gaming PC tech, is only going to continue to exist all the way through 2023 and 2024, meaning a lot of these contracts were made with massive orders, yet demand has simply fallen off a cliff, which means that there's a massive oversupply in PC gaming products at this point in time in the market, and it's only feared to get much worse when we're seeing things like China's domestic consumption itself, which has traditionally been a savior for low consumption in the West, is now starting to falter itself. The last thing that I'm also starting to notice is that as these bank runs happen in China and people can't get access to their money, these products that exist in China, like a massive oversupply of CPUs or GPUs, whether it's ex-miners trying to sell off their GPUs before the massive Ethereum merge next month, we're seeing that this overflow from China is now starting to make its way into the West. And what this means is essentially lower prices. What I was surprised to see earlier this year was Ryzen 5 5500s and 5600s, which were brand new SKUs being released on AliExpress as used. And there's nothing used about these CPUs. Essentially, what this means is the Chinese economy themselves aren't consuming them at these prices that are already much cheaper than that of America, and so they're going on AliExpress and selling them for a cheaper price just to be able to offload them. Now, if they're this price on AliExpress, I would imagine that you can get a Ryzen 5 5500 in China for under $100 US. That's how cheap a 6-core 12-threaded CPU is getting in 2022. And when we adjust that for inflation, this is some of the cheapest prices on tech that we've ever seen in our lifetimes. This then raises the final question of, will prices get cheaper? And what we're starting to see is the prices will start to come down even more than what they were yesterday, simply because we've got this massive oversupply of GPUs which were bought up by crypto miners. Now, we all know that that's going to come onto the market sooner or later, and it's looking like it is much sooner than later. And in fact, what we're starting to see is websites in China, people are mass listing their graphics cards, and they're asking around $420 US for a 3070, and people are laughing at those prices. No one's really taking the bait. Basically, people want to see the prices come down even more on these RTX 3070s, especially if they've been mined on and they're from a crypto miner. So this is only the first wave of cheaper GPU prices to come later on this year. However, I do think it will reach a point where prices just simply cannot get any cheaper, because it's not in these interests for companies like Nvidia, AMD, and Intel to make these products at a loss. And so therefore, they will start reducing their future shipments and things will eventually balance out. But the golden age of PC gaming is definitely on its way, and it's looking like it's coming sooner than later. So if you've been waiting to build a gaming PC, the next few months are going to get very interesting in terms of pricing. And so if you do see something come down to extremely low prices, I do recommend looking out for the best bargains possible, and even if you want a second opinion, you can drop a comment down in Tech Yes City's comments, and the lovely people around here will usually tell you if it is a good deal or not. Anyhow guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. It did take me a while to break down a lot of the research in today's video, so if you did enjoy this one, be sure to hit that like button. Also let us know in the comment section below if you have any thoughts and opinions of your own. Love reading those as always, just like this question of the day here. And this comes from Zero Ground, and they ask, can the i5 12400 be undervolted? And the answer is yes, it can. You can slightly undervolt it, and you can also drop the clock speeds down, but I do recommend doing this in conjunction with a better aftermarket cooling solution. Even something like the Snowman, which is $20 on AliExpress, can drop those temperatures a lot, but also drop the power consumption with those temperatures. Anyway guys, with that aside, if you stayed this far and you're still watching this Tech Yes content and you're not yet subscribed, make sure to hit that sub button, ring that bell, and I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. And also, sorry if I haven't uploaded in over a week. My son got COVID, and then I was taking care of him, and I got COVID for a second time, but at least the second time around, it's a lot easier than the first time, so it does get better. But I hope this isn't a thing where I'm catching COVID like 3 times a year. It's going to be a bit of a pain in the A. So anyhow, with that aside, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out for now. Bye.